Tommy and Bickie were looking at each other just as Bickie had finished drawing a picture that he was trying to get mad back at Miss Kitty because he was mad over the spelling bee. She had tried to slap him. Some of the kids had tumbled and jumbled all over the floor because they were lined up for the spelling bee. And just as he was finishing drawing a picture of Miss Kitty with just a skeleton and a head, he saw a shadow on his shoulder, and he looked, and there was Miss Kitty, and she reached over and gave him the hardest pinch, and Bickie just sat there and would not cry, even though his eyes were getting full of water. He sat there for a few minutes, and they finished their schoolwork. School was out, and just as they were leaving school, Bickie was wearing that big old bustle coat and wearing the plug hat with the scarf over it, being embarrassed again about that. Who was coming in the schoolyard but Soldier Rudolph? Soldier Rudolph, you remember they had met him when they were out goose hunting the day before. Bickie had given him his soldier coat thinking that would get rid of the coat and make his life better, but he ended up with Mother's bustle coat, which only made things worse. Well, Soldier Rudolph came into the schoolyard and he said, "Boys, I wanted to ask you a question. An old soldier friend of mine from the war had said that there was a house here that had a rose vine growing by the front porch and 2 windows up in the gables, and I wanted to speak to that family for him. Do any of you remember a place like that?" Well, Bickie and Tommy should have thought of it right away, but for some reason it didn't click in their minds which house they were talking about. So they said, "Well, we'll think about it, and if we hear of something like that, we'll let you know." So they ran on home, and sure enough, when they got home, the place smelled beautiful. They were living in the granary because their house had burned down, and they had converted the old grain storage place to a place for Mom to live in, and then a little lean-to on the side for the boys to sleep in. She had cooked the goose, come up with some potatoes, some milk, and they were having a grand feast. As they sat there having the feast, Brother John came in from Marshalltown, and they were all sitting there enjoying each other's company. And they began to say, "Well, now what are we going to do? We've got to harvest the corn. In fact, it's already a little late in October. We've had 1 snowfall already. We've got to get all that corn in and get it husked, put in the wagon, and sold off to the man at the grain elevator. How are we going to do it? There's just a few of us." Well, as they were sitting there talking about that, who should show up but Hake Collins? Hake Collins says, "Yes, Miss Ross, I'm just protecting my interest, just protecting that mortgage money you still owe me. I'm going to have my men come here Monday, and we're going to harvest that 20 acres of corn for you." And John said, "No, Mr. Collins, we don't want that. We can do it ourselves." He said, "I don't know. I'm just trying to protect my property. Y'all let that house burn down anyway. I'm going to bring my men Monday and get this job done right." Well, he left, and as they sat there wondering what they were going to do, they said, "How can we do that? If he harvests the corn, he'll take the corn and sell it, but then he'll take some of that money and pay the 4 men who are going to work. That's going to cost us at least $50, and the corn isn't going to bring the whole 300 that we need anyway. How are we going to do this?" He said, "Well, here's what we're going to do." John looked at Bickie and Tommy. He said, "You're not going to school the rest of the week. You're staying home, and we're going to start harvesting the corn, and we'll be out there all day, and we'll even light lanterns at night if we have to." And Mother said, "I'll help you too." So sure enough, the next morning they got up bright early, did their chores, and they got the horses hooked up to the wagon, and they began to go down the rows of corn, pulling corn off, shucking it, husking it, throwing it in the wagon. They did this for 1 day and 2 days, and it was such hard work. Their hands got sore, their shoulders were sore. They were out there early in the morning when the sun first coming up till well after the sun went down, and they were only stopping to have water and some cornmeal mush and some milk. After 2 days of this, they stopped and looked, and they still had more than 10 acres to go. They said, "We're not going to make it. It's only 2 days till the Sabbath, and even though we're not going to school, there's nothing we would do to break the Sabbath. We can't work on Sabbath, and then Hake Collins will be here on Monday anyway. How are we going to get this done?" Well, just as they were looking and thinking who should show up but their good friend, Red Hog Smith. And Red Hog Smith came over and said, "Listen, I see you need some help. I'm going to come and help you. I've got another friend that's going to come and help, and we'll get this corn in. And they said, yes, we will. So they began to work hard the next day and the next day, and sure enough, they were able to get all the corn in. Well, Bickie looked down at his shoes after those days of working in the cornfield, and his shoes were pretty thin already. And he looked at them now, and they were totally broken and cracked. In fact, his feet had been walking on the dirt quite a bit. Red Hog Smith saw him looking at his shoes and said, come on, boy, come with me. We're going to get you some shoes. He said, no, 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 we need to give the money to Mr. Collins to pay the mortgage. And he said, Mr. Collins can wait. You need some new shoes. So Bickie went and got a pair of new shoes, and he came back home, and they were feeling so good about it. Well, they got the corn all together, put it over in one of the back stalls of the barn, and Saturday night, the man from the grain elevator came over and bought the corn and paid them almost $100. Well, if they were there counting the money, they said, here, we'll have it ready. And sure enough, Monday morning, Hake Collins shows up, and he has the 4 men with him, but he's surprised. He looks, and the cornfield has already been harvested. John doesn't say anything because he and Mr. Collins obviously don't get along. And he just hands the money, and old Hake counts it. He recounts it. And he says, well, almost $100. You still owe me $204.03. So Bickie and Tommy and John walked back to the house, and Mother said, how did that go? He said, fine, Mr. Collins, not happy about it, but he got his money. But he reminded us, we only have till January to get the rest of the money, $204.03. They said, what are we going to do? Bickie and Tommy ran off to school, and they were getting ready for the Thanksgiving program. As they got to school, they began to practice and think about all the things they had to do. And while they were practicing, sure enough, Soldier Rudolph came again and began to ask about that house with the yellow vine and the 2 green windows up under the gables. Finally, Tommy realized, he said, that was our house. Our house burned down. Would you like to see it? Well, I can't show you the house because the house burned down, but I can show you where it was. And Chaplain Rudolph, the Army chaplain, said, yes, I'd love to see it. I'll come tomorrow. Bickie ran home that evening, and Bickie said, Mom, Soldier Rudolph is coming to our house tomorrow. He's been asking about a house with a yellow vine and 2 gable windows, 2 windows up under the gable of a house. Well, as they were there talking about Soldier Rudolph's visit, who should come up but Hake Collins? Hake Collins came up and knocked on the door, and he said, I'm here to protect my interest. You still owe me some money for the mortgage, and I need some more security. You let the house burn down, you sold the corn, but we got to have more. And he began to look around at all the furniture they had. Here was a table and some chairs, but Mom said, well, Mr. Collins, most of this stuff is not ours. The neighbors, when our house burned down and all the stuff in it got burned, people donated. That table was donated, the chairs were donated, and Hake Collins looked over at the stove, and it was a nice stove. He said, what about that stove? Well, that belongs to Mr. Red Hog Smith. Hake Collins kind of got a frown on his face. And as he looked around, he saw the beautiful big stone there, because John now had whitewashed the thunder egg, made it look like a real giant egg. And he said, yeah, I like stones. And he went over and looked at that, and he began to pick it up and said, that's a heavy one. Bickie went over and said, that's my stone, that's my stone. We've been using it here in the house. We found it over here. And Hake Collins said, well, I like old stones and I like to collect them. I think I'll just take that on home with me. Bickie began to fuss and cry, and John said, Bickie, quiet now. It's just a stone. If mean old Mr. Collins wants to pick on children and orphans, just let him have the stone. And so Hake Collins took the stone away, and Bickie laid in his bed that night wondering what was going to happen. Maybe that stone was valuable. Maybe Hake Collins knew it. Maybe something was going to happen that would help them, or maybe it wouldn't help them, since now Mr. Collins had the stone. What would happen next? The soldier was going to come tomorrow. Maybe he had some ideas too. Come back for the next episode, and we'll see what happens with the thunder egg and Soldier Rudolph's visit.